announce that we're not doing it because nobody's here.
Yeah. Well, that was the plan, but.
But next time that we're having that item on the agenda, I'm not going to be here.
Oh, no,
So I'm gonna
you
skip it.
have to be here.
No, I'm going to skip it. I know all the rules.
Maybe we should make you give it then right now, actually.
I could do that.
I'd like to call this meeting to order Tuesday, October 15th at 6 p.m. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Anderson,
Here.
Commissioner Deturi,
Here.
Commissioner Heller, here, Commissioner McGillivary,
Here.
Commissioner Treadwell, maybe later, and Commissioner Swanson.
Here.
And then Commissioners Hershey, Knapp, and O'Brien have communicated they are unavailable tonight. Or out of the country.
Thank you. Any announcements?
No announcements that I know of, but I will let you know that also Sean is out this week. And because we're missing a few people on the Planning Commission today and Sean, the first item on our agenda, the governance training, we are going to put off for a future meeting. And right now we're looking at November 19th. And the clerk and city attorney who will be presenting that along with Sean have asked that you all let them know as early as possible if you can't be there, because they would like a full board for that presentation. Just passing that along.
Thank you. So we can move forward with the topics for discussion, omitting A. So we'll start right off with the discussion on short-term rental regulations, please.
Okay, so Sean has put some information in your packets just for preliminary discussion about short-term rentals. It became clear during the master plan process and lots of information and input we've gotten from the public that there are concerns overall about short-term rentals and the rules that apply, and possibly that there's a plethora of short-term rentals and maybe the rules need to be reevaluated. So Sean has provided some information showing, giving kind of an overview of what the current regulations are. And how they differ between different zoning districts, and how many we have, and where those exist. We have roughly 500 short-term rentals on an annual basis in the city. They're not allowed in the single-family residential districts. And then we have some tourist homes as well. So really, my goal for today is just to kind of feel out the Planning Commission, find out what additional information you might like to see in order to feel like you have the information you need to give some recommendations on any changes to the approach that the city's taking. And also if you have any preliminary thoughts on what you do think should be up for discussion or should be considered for change.
I think we can keep the structure of the conversation pretty informal because it's a study session and because we're talking about short-term rentals. I'll try to get to everybody quickly, but I think if I don't acknowledge you, and there's silence, just go for it. In terms of my experience on this board and around these discussions, I was involved in 2 of them, so I can speak to those experiences. One of them was, and I can't do years or estimation of time at all, so one of them was a conversation around the C districts and office uses. It came up as a use, and I really cannot remember the driving factor behind why we limited it, other than it was a conversation around the office uses, specifically, I think, in C3, C4. And we were talking about coming up with some sort of limitation so that way all of that office space did not just get converted over. I think it was also in the same conversation we were talking about first floor uses, because we saw a lot of first floor uses in the downtown being converted from a restaurant per se into a short-term rental, and we wanted to try to get ahead of that momentum, because it would be a very weird experience if you come to a downtown city that is cute and quaint and actually a whole block is now first floor short-term rentals and no activity for the residents, like restaurants or retail. And the outcome of that conversation was that the Planning Commission had recommended for a full removal of that use, and the City Commission at the time did not approve and decided to rework our recommendation to a percentage approach that you can see on page 3 of 12 in the short-term rental packet. That like percentage breakdown was what came out of that conversation. Correct me if I'm wrong also.
Is that the page that you're talking
Yes, perfect. Thanks, Katie. Then the other part of this that I recognized was the hospital district conversation that we had. That was also pretty close in time to when we had the conversation about short-term rentals in the C districts, because we had found that hospitality houses were, scratch that, short-term rentals were operating in the hospitality district, even though they were not an allowed use. Then an applicant came before us and said, actually, how about we create a hospitality use? And they asserted that there would be just as much of a need in the H1 and H2 districts for that kind of use. As we saw in the packet, that may not be the case anymore, that it is being exclusively used for the definition of a hospitality house, which we had always kind of noodled over the fact that that would be a challenge to adhere to or enforce. Those are the two that I remember since being on the Planning Commission, talking about short-term rentals and hospitality houses, with the exception of the fact that it comes up so often when we meet with the public or have open houses, especially when we were proposing housing amendments last year. Every single event we had and I attended, I heard about complaints of short-term rentals, and short-term rentals should not be allowed in residential districts, and that was a constant need to course correct with the community members, because that is not allowed in most of these, in all of the residential districts. So that's my memory. That's like my little synopsis of what I've experienced in this role in terms of short-term rentals. It is a hot button issue. It is something we've heard a lot about. Just kind of wanted to start there. Go ahead.
Well, thanks for reminding me of how we got to hospitality use, that we created it. I forgot that we did that. It's sort of highlighted in this report, so I guess I'm interested to know how many hospitality uses are ongoing in the I think it's just allowed in the H districts.
Only H1 and 2, yeah.
Yeah, so if it's an issue, or if we, maybe we need to look back at it and an issue and either rework it or strip it out. And the ones that are using it, they're grandfathered in, so even if we remove it, it's not gonna impact them. The question is, do we wanna allow more of those to go forward? I just don't know. It's not a huge thing on my radar screen, but I guess I'd like more information, know how many actual hospitality houses we have. Yeah, I was here for the change in the C1 and C2. And I think my memory on that and why, one of the reasons we got started in it is because the C1 and C2 are really neighborhood commercial districts. And we started questioning whether or not a hotel or, short-term rental type use was, and they were propping up all over. Look at, I think it's page 5. If you go to that page and you look in the C2 district, how many there are, it's got as many as, I can't tell, my eyes aren't that good. Whatever the pink one is. Is that,
It's like 90,
Is that-
85 or something.
Yeah, 85, 90, somewhere in there.
yeah. But then, what's the other district that's got a lot of them? So, I mean, there's that, C3. These are small. Oh, HR, hotel, resort.
A1.
It's got the most, and then the D districts.
Yeah.
I think, and they were just, and the question was, is that, it was a question for us of housing. And do we, we want that? And we did go through it a long time. It was a very long discussion. Attracted a lot of public comment. And we decided it just simply wasn't appropriate for C1, C2. Sent it to the city commission, and the question came out, and we did discuss this, but we were sort of divided on it. We did discuss having a percentage on there, and we never really quite could reach a consensus on the planning commission. And the purpose of of allowing up to 25% was simply to offer it as a sort of a housing incentive to get more. If you can get 7 units, and if you can get 8 units, you could add 6 more housing units and 2 short-term rentals. I think it's very, we considered that a win. And we looked at some of the, and for the percentage, we looked at some of the developments in the commons, and some of those, because they don't ban it, but each association has its own rules, and there's a number of different condo associations there. And if I recall, I think they said they had the most problem where it was 50-50, and that another one that was more like 30% seemed to be working out pretty well. So we were kind of in that range, 25 to 35%. So I think that works still for those districts. Is there more short-term rentals you're not going to get rid of any of these because we zone them. So everything that's existing, the question is you're not going to see, you shouldn't see many more, only than, a couple here or there in the C2 district going forward. So I don't have any concern about that. You shouldn't see a lot more in C1. Then it just comes down to what you want to do about some of the other districts. And honestly, in the hotel resort district, I think it should stay at 100%. If you're a hotel resort district, that's my position. I don't see any reason to change that. These are basically hotels. So.
Yeah, I think I misspoke when I was saying C3, C4, but you're right, it's C1, C2.
We talked about C3 and C4.
I think we did too. Yeah, okay.
But we ended up not doing it.
Yeah, I think as far as the HR district, I'm totally in alignment. Like, that makes sense. That is a great place for that use. I think new definitions of the C districts could be lumped into this conversation as well, because we are trying to make them really accessible and community friendly. And does that short-term rental use always fall into that definition? I don't know. We'll have to, in my opinion, I'd want to go through each of the districts and look at it. Because it might not. So, and I think in terms of C3, C4, D1, D3, I think there should be some sort of cap. I don't believe 100% is fine, because as long as that is an option, I would see that getting used. I would see people wanting that over long-term housing or long-term renting. So I am fine with a cap in any of those districts, and frankly think there should be. I think that we are probably one of few communities that doesn't have a cap in a lot of our districts, and that is scary. Like, there are townships, I should say, that are completely banning or are limiting in a more structured way. And I think that being the kind of community that we are, it opens us up to not caring for residents over just leaving it open to chance, I think. It's not a great way of saying it, but I think everybody up here at least understands what I'm trying to say, especially when neighboring municipalities are outright banning. That pressure then comes onto us, and I just don't know if zero ban for the entire city and multiple districts within the city is the way to go, because that pressure would inevitably be filtered into our districts.
Question. When you say cap, are we talking about a number or percentage?
I am fine with either way. I think in my opinion, it makes more sense to go with whichever is more enforceable, and I think we would need more information from staff and from like the licensing department to see what is easier for them, because I don't want to make more work for people. And in terms of like, yeah, I would entertain either at this point. I feel like I don't have enough information. Yeah.
We're talking at this point, I think, about zoning code options, and I wondered, in our conversation, is there an appetite to look beyond that? I mean, are we interested in considering the impact of some police power codes? I mean, ownership restrictions or annual licensing, or how do we go about enforcement? Do we beef up enforcement or fines? Or, I mean, what tools are in the toolkit for this conversation, I guess is my question to the rest of the folks here.
At least for me, I'm interested in police power. I think it makes sense. There's a lot of things that we as a planning commission can do, and there's a lot of things that we cannot do. And one of them, we heard from a member of the public that they're interested in increasing a fee, which makes a lot of sense, fees and fines, because as we've heard, the fees and fines don't do enough detriment to the rental that they just pay it and repost it. So I think that is something that is definitely possible and of interest to me specifically, and it would have to go through police power. Yeah.
So, I personally disagree. I'm gonna throw this out right now. One, fines are set, the most you can fine under these ordinances, unless you want to, it's all regulated by state law. So, I think the city's already at the max. And my recollection of it was we set it at the max that was allowed under a civil fine at the time.
Got it.
And I don't know if that's changed at all.
What is that? How much?
think
That's like
it's- I
$50,
thought-
like that guy said?
What?
I think
think
it's
it's
500.
It's up to 500, and it can
Oh.
be $500 a day, but you never get that out of the, it's like somebody, it's like anything, any type of civil or criminal, you generally don't get the max, so it's always at the discretion of the magistrate or the district court judge. But the other thing is, the city sets its fees based on the cost to administer the program. And those fees are reviewed every year by the city clerk. And the city clerk pretty much tells, and anything above that isn't a fee. And then it's a tax. And is it a equal tax? And that gets into all sorts of other issues. So pretty much the city clerk estimates the cost of the fee and, and makes that determination. Now, there is a cost, one of the things in the packet talked about, do we want to change the term of the, how long the license goes?
Yeah.
I think that's a question for the city clerk who issues them and for staff who does the enforcement. What's best for them, and we don't need to be involved in that. We don't want to create things that are more difficult to enforce. I agree with you on that.
Yeah.
We don't want to cause a lot of enforcement issues for staff and through zoning. But anything else is really the police powers. It's like we can make a recommendation on it. But it's not really our bailiwick. And they're going to go through, then the staff's going to have to do the same thing with the city commission for, it's sort of like, what's the point? Yeah, if the city can increase the fines or whatever, go for it. There's your statement. Maximum fines, maximum fee allowed. Okay, but they never get the max anyways. So, and as far as I know, we're already there. There, we've solved that question.
So maybe as we're continuing to have this conversation, Commissioners Treadwell and Anderson can kind of feel out that appetite from the city commission, because if that is an interest, a police power ordinance, then we can loop that into this conversation. If not, if there's no interest, then maybe we go the other avenues that we have.
Yeah, I understand people want to do it, but we're kind of limited. In enforcement's difficult. We've heard it. It's difficult, and it's not because of the city, it's just difficult to do. And, one of the things we've heard, and we've raised this before, it'd be easier if neighbors who had concerns or see this would, drop the dime. But nobody wants to drop the dime or be the snitch, but that's, doesn't work. Someone's violating the law, someone's out in the backyard punching somebody, you're going to report them, right? Same thing, it's a violation of the law.
Do you have any data about, currently when we become aware of an enforcement issue, what the source of that notification is? Does it come from our software? Does it come from neighbors? Do you have any data about that?
I think it's a combination of those. We do get complaints from neighbors, but otherwise it's kind of the software and a little sleuthing. It's never that obvious, and people have figured out how you can kind of work the system a little.
Any guesstimate about the balance of the sources?
I've been in the city for less than a year now. Katie might have a better feel for this, but I would say there aren't a ton of complaints as far as here's an illegal short-term rental. But I would say, from what I've seen, about 50-50, either figuring it out or being told by somebody. And sometimes I think there's a clue that there's one, but then when we're told by somebody, that corroborates the information we already have.
I just want to say though, it can be hard to tell. Leslie and I are neighbors, and she was just talking about our other neighbor and said, is this a short-term rental? Like, we couldn't quite figure out, but it's like people work, we have jobs.
The wellness?
I don't, huh?
The wellness?
No. Mitch is also a neighbor. But, it isn't even always easy for neighbors. I have no idea if they are using that as a short-term rental or not,
They
but
just have a big family.
they
that
could just
likes
have a
to
big
move.
family, yeah, so,
And for the record, I don't think they are.
you don't think, right, yes, but then how would we, they do have a lot of different
It's
cars
just a
there right
question,
now.
if you have a concern, then you gotta call the city.
I always steer people to the city.
But it's not allowed in residential districts. Most of the enforcement issues are going on in residential districts. We're not talking about allowing it in residential districts. So the whole enforcement discussion, I think, it's really a question for the city commission and staff. I mean, I don't know if there's a better way to do it. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't, I don't know. But I'm not gonna sit here and try and tell staff, oh, why don't we do this? I mean, wanna hire more enforcement people? I don't know. I don't know how many complaints you're going. I don't know if it's really an issue in residential. I don't know how, I know it's a constant ongoing thing. Okay, and there's always someone gonna do it, and I hear about it too, through my business, about, it happens, but I don't think we're swamped with them in the residential districts. Maybe I'm wrong, so.
In terms of, if we're looking at the little list on page 7 of ideas, I think we've moved through that pretty quickly. There is one that we haven't talked about yet that I thought was interesting. It's number 4, which is eliminating the distinction between high-intensity and low-intensity tourist homes. It didn't even make sense to me, and there's no way to enforce that. So that seems like a really simple one, that if it's defined as a tourist home, then it's a tourist home instead of high versus low. I don't know if anybody else thought that way.
Yeah, I can tell you I was here for that one too.
Oh.
So I can tell you the background on that.
Sure.
And one, we felt at the time, this was an expansion. Okay, so before, we only had them, you had to be like half a mile away. So there's only like 4 or 5 of them throughout the whole city. And these, while we call these tourist homes, they're what people used to think of as, people like me, my age, used to actually think of what a B&B was, a bed and breakfast, where you people came in, they served you breakfast, you stayed in the house with them. So, before Airbnb became a thing and became short-term rentals. So it's always confusing. Anyways, and this, so we expanded it and we went through a lot of different discussions on this, but there were some people who had been operating, bed and breakfast operations in the city for a very long time. And then we had some other people who just were trying to do just little ones, and sometimes they were blocked. They just wanted to do it occasionally in the summer or whatever, and sometimes they were blocked because somebody 2 blocks, 3 blocks away had a license, wasn't using it, but was never going to give it up. And I think we had one case where someone had a license and wasn't giving it up simply to stop anyone else from doing it. That was what the story was. I don't know if it was true or not. That's what they told me. So this was an expansion of it. Now, and it's like everything else. It's like, okay, we're going to try this. Should we make it even larger? Let's see how this goes. Let's take one step.
And then it just stuck around.
Yeah, but the biggest difference between the two is you still have a separation now. I think it's 1,000 feet. And I don't know. I guess my question on that is for staff is there, one, are we getting complaints about licensed tourist homes? Have we ever had a complaint about them? And 2, is there are there people who'd like to have the different license? And then, of course, I'm sure the the one type, the lower use type is a lower fee and has less requirements than the higher use type. So as I recall. But, you know, I don't have an issue with it right now. I mean, I think one of the things we talked about at the time was, you know, how would you feel though if suddenly you're on the block and you got 5 of them on your block, you know, who are doing it year round? Now, will that ever happen? Probably not. But, you know, if you're talking about housing affordability, you know, allowing people to do it, 84 nights is still a lot of nights, but, you know, and I don't know. You know, like I said, if there's a big demand for it, then, you know, maybe we reconsider it for the more nights. My guess is, like you say, people are just using the smaller nights and just not keeping track. I think technically they're supposed to keep track and keep a log and turn it into the city clerk's office.
So might also be an area for us to get feedback and data from staff.
Yes, that's on the list.
You send a letter to all the people who have 84 nights and ask them if they'd like to go beyond that. Most people want to be in compliance with the rules, you know.
There's another piece of data that I would find really helpful, and that would be the total number of dwelling units in the city. You know, seasonal versus year-round residences, and then just so that we have some base of comparison when we're looking at 550 short-term rentals. Is that a significant share of what total dwelling unit? You know, is there an opportunity cost relative to year-round use? And how large is that? You know, teeny bit of our total housing stock, or is it a significant share?
And I'd say in that picture, also look at the number of otherwise designated lodging facilities, that is, hotel and motel rooms. Because a big part of this discussion is how firmly we want the distinction between lodging and dwelling to be. It's, I'd say in the last century, it was a little more distinct, that you had a hotel or a motel, and you had a house, and then you might have some bed and breakfasts in between, but this whole short-term rental debate has opened up cans of worms that we didn't know existed. And getting back to the D districts and some of the C districts, I'm seeing part of the issue being in that if we're not permitting 100% in HR, but we are permitting it in some other areas, then you can end up in areas where somebody isn't or wants to be able to rent essentially hotel rooms, but on a short-term rental platform, and is denied that opportunity legally, so they build it as condos, and then they can build it. Given the patchwork nature of our current zoning map, it may be worth it for staff and or the subcommittee to look into the possibility of an overlay district, because, for example, our hotel resort district is, yes, largely along Munson Avenue and then along East Front Street, Grandview Parkway. But in that area, you have a patchwork of parcels that are also C1 or C2. And then you've also got parcels, I would say, in the D3 district and near the intersection of Grandview Parkway and Division Street that have seen more development, but because of proximity to the waterfront and downtown, which are our prime tourist attractions for this area, have seen increased interest and demand for tourist-centric lodging or residential areas. So I don't want to just draw up lines on a map, but it may be worthwhile to say these are portions of the city where there is increased interest in lodging generally, but be it in a designated hotel or in short-term rentals, but that is where it makes sense to allow short-term rentals as it used to be, and not that you would wipe the slate of 500 plus short-term rentals across the city away and shift them into that area, but if you open up opportunities in some places, but essentially close off the expansion in other parts of the city, it would have some shifting over time. And that could lead to greater consistency in terms of you might have a parcel that's not a residentially zoned use, but is directly adjacent to residential areas that people complain about because they think it should be more in the neighborhood character of the surrounding area.
Question, so you're talking about trying to, instead of basically regulating it by district, by basically deciding where you want short-term rentals and hotel lodging to be in the city, drawing a circle around that area, maybe it runs all the way along the highways, okay, and just the highways. And limiting it just to those areas.
I'm not saying just to those areas. I'm putting forth a suggestion for something that you, as a member of the subcommittee, could consider.
There's no subcommittee.
Yeah,
The
we
subcommittee
decided
got rid
no,
of.
yeah.
My question is so what is your goal here? So what's really what are you trying? Why are you trying to sort of corral them into fewer areas, or are you trying to create an opportunity for more short-term rentals, for less short-term rentals, the same number of short-term rentals? And the question
It could be about the same number, but I'm saying recognizing lodging as distinct from dwelling.
Well, I don't think we define lodging or dwelling. I mean, lodging is considered basically hotel or motels or lodging facilities. Dwelling units are just a way of counting. You can have a hotel room and it's a dwelling unit technically. It's so where someone can live, unless you want to include a kitchen. I'm not quite sure how it gets us where it takes us.
We do
but
have a lodging facility definition.
We do have a
And
lodging.
the
But
Census
not the
Bureau
other one.
defines
Yes.
dwellings.
So you need to define for me what you mean by dwelling.
I'd say something occupied for a longer period of time, whether that's 3 months, 6 months, or some other period. If you want to get into technicals of enforcement, it could be where the occupant receives mail and pays utility bills, but that is, again, getting into enforcement, which can be tricky.
Yeah, I think generally it's 30 days is under current state law. Anything over 30 days would be considered dwelling. I guess my overall thought on this, and I'll just, here is that, my goal here isn't to limit short-term rentals. My goal here is to increase the number of long-term housing units. And I think the question which I raised previously and the information I'd like to see, is in my experience, and I haven't looked at it recently, I don't operate in that field, and I haven't been looking at for any clients at short-term rentals recently. But generally, they sell faster. If you have a unit that's 8 units and you've got 2 short-term rentals, they generally sell first and often for more money. Now, that market has changed some in the last year or two and I don't know if I don't think generally the demand, what I've heard anecdotally, isn't as high for those units. People are having a harder time for them. A lot of times people would rather rent a house. We generally don't allow that unless it's in a commercial district. The last thing I heard, I talked to someone who's in the business, is pretty much if you've got unique spaces, those are still in high demand. If you don't have unique spaces, not so much. Just because you have a short-term license doesn't mean you're limited on how long someone can stay there. All it does is allow you to have people stay there for less than 30 days. Most people who do short-term rentals, a lot of them will often do month or 2-month or 6-month rentals. Longer term, I'm open to a cap on some of the districts. For me, the D1 and the D3, probably their most, maybe C3, maybe C4, but I would agree with that we should probably look at each district individually as we go through it. I don't know why we allow it in the industrial district.
I think it was in the hopes that it would spread out there, and I think that hasn't happened much.
Is it because we used to allow it in the transportation district? Because it made sense to allow hotels in transportation districts, so we allowed it in industrial district. The only reason I remember, and I wasn't on the city commission, but I remember when they changed the ordinance when they amended the ordinance to allow residential uses in the industrial district. And that was a specific request from an individual who wanted to put apartment buildings in the industrial park. And the reasoning at the time of that planning commission and city commission was it made sense to allow people, to live close to work, where they want to work. So then the question becomes, why do we allow short-term rentals? Because it doesn't really, does it now serve the same purpose? I don't know. But I remember that's the reason why. So if you're talking about, changing any of those caps, the only one I'd be open to is the industrial district. And again, there's a few in there already. And I think the other thing you have to weigh on that is our industrial districts are kind of strange because some of them are literally in the heart of the city and are being gentrified. They're not really used for a lot of industry anymore. There's still a few spots, but, residential uses, commercial uses are really pushing on them. So do we even need to, in that case, does it make sense to allow short-term rentals there? And does it still encourage, if we're going to have these places redeveloped for housing, is it an incentive? It's kind of my question, but.
Yeah, go ahead, Jerry.
Yeah, so I'm fortunate enough to be the one that maintained this database for a long time. One of the things I noticed was so this would have been maybe 2018, we had 2019, before the changes, because if I recall, the changes were 2019, right, when we changed the percentages?
Sounds about right.
So I remember at one point the number being like 120, and then the changes occurred, and then obviously COVID happened, but like almost, it was like 100 a year were just being added to the licenses. Every year when they renew, there'd be more. And then it became clear that like certain buildings, the whole building would just be, and I think that's the 100%, right? Or buildings that were maybe all apartments or units started to convert. Now I'm also interested is like, what is that? I kept thinking, is that number ever going to like stop going up? I didn't know, and we won't know that, but what was interesting though is if, some of this could obviously eventually, if it's oversaturated, right, eventually it could become housing again or normal units, which the market will drive that, but I'd just be interested in these percentages, like if we were to if we were to reduce all of those from 100 down, I mean, all those are already built, right? They're not gonna, it's just gonna prevent new building, probably.
Yeah.
Which I don't know if that's what we're necessarily trying to do. But yeah,
As-
the numbers have been fascinating to follow just because I kept being like, I guess they're just gonna keep going up, but I feel like they're starting to level off. We've obviously now, it's been really hard to maintain this. We have a new software that we purchased a couple years ago. Because it did, from a staff standpoint, it became like, a lot of work to maintain this manually, so we've kind of automated some of it, but yeah. So the 500, just always, I see that, I'm like, wow, I remember when that was like 120. But at the same time, all those are pretty, they're in, if you look at the map, I mean, they're clustered in the areas that we allow them, so.
The
Not
part that is challenging for me is I'm pretty sure I'm the only resident in a C4 district. I think everybody else is residential, at least of the 5 of us. Correct me if I'm wrong. But as somebody that's in a C4, it is really painful to constantly hear the turnover of, so I live in TC Lofts, everybody knows this. It's the building just before the corner of State and Boardman. That building, it has 39 units in it. They are all apartments. They are a combination of seasonal residents, long-term residents. I think there might be a single short-term rental unit in the entire building because the property owners have taken a stance against, and they want it to be long-term housing. The condominiums right next to me along Boardman, at the last 3 units, which is so my apartment faces the alley, faces this direction. Those last 3 units are short-term rentals. That alley is very tight, and so it's like clockwork. Every Thursday, Friday, you get a new short-term rental user coming in. They can't get in and out of those garages. It is an hour's worth of communicating. No, you're good. It's very entertaining, but it's every
first time,
single weekend.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the reruns get tiring.
The reruns are old. And I believe when I first moved into the building, it's been there 6.5 years roughly. I've been in since day one. I didn't feel like that was happening as much. So I think it correlates with what you're saying, Jerry, in that we saw this increase in the districts that we allow 100% in. And then you just kind of feel that in every sense of the meaning of that. And so if we don't do something, that could be that all those condos could turn over. My entire apartment building, if the property owner ever decided to sell, could turn over, and it could be another trailside situation. So I just worry that if we don't do something, what will happen in 5, 10, 15 years, because that's what we're doing. This is what happened like 5 years ago. We probably could have predicted this. And if we don't, what will happen for the future of the city? And frankly, I'll feel really bad, and I think my Catholic guilt complex will just overtake me if we have housing as a goal and we are not doing something about it, because this is such a huge portion of that I think we will be leaving something on the table, whatever metaphor we want to use. I feel like there will be a part of the housing conversation that we're not activating if we don't do something about this aspect. Yeah.
And if I could mention a related concern, I thought Jerry's perspective in terms of growth, and is it plateauing, is it growing but at a slower pace, those are knowable data points. I think another piece of information that would be really helpful would be to understand, in terms of new construction, say since 2018, 2019, when short-term rentals became possible, if we could report out of all new construction within the city limits, you know, what share was dedicated to short-term rentals and what share was dedicated to year-round use. And I'm always conscious of our limited geographic boundaries and area, and are we making the smartest use of that land? And that has to link back, I think, to the work that's being done on our strategic planning, which is saying who does Traverse City want to be 10 years from now? And so this is, I'm very willing to take something to the city commission, but I would appreciate a robust conversation with this group about what that might look like.
I think one of the things, if I recall, going to Jerry's comments about the growth, is when we basically changed it and put that cap on the C1 and C2, and we created the whole licensing thing, we had a sort of a roll in. You know, we gave people time and extensions to get licensed. And so I think that's why it started slow, and then it really crested as they got to that, the last, do it now or you'll never get another chance. Because it's my understanding, if I'm in a C2 district with a 25% cap and 50% of the people are there have licenses, I can't get a license, just even because my building is no longer in compliance. And if I'm one of the 50% with a license, and I let my license lapse, and I don't know how long this takes, but basically if it's to a point where you legally abandon the use, then you can't get that license back. So I don't know what that time frame is or how that matters, but over time, that may occur. I don't know, like I said, I don't know what, that's beyond my expertise. That's a city clerk, attorney, planning people, but eventually you abandon that use. So those numbers should come down, but it's not going to come down quickly, because I know there's some people who went and got that license, paying for that license, and have never rented out their place for a single day, because for them it's just an investment. You know, they use it as a second home. They come up, they're here for weekends or a week or a month or whatever, and they just, when they sell it, they want to keep having that license, which, I mean, that's only smart. So just because we have 500 units being used that way doesn't mean. And the other thing to think about is a lot of these people are places that are used as short-term rentals. They're owned by somebody who uses them as a summer home. And when they're not here, they rent it out short-term. And eliminating that won't necessarily put that in the full year-round market. So I think the impact on this is going to be small, what we do. You're not going to reduce it. Could you slow it in some areas? I think so. I think the biggest thing is, I like the incentive idea. I still like that percentage. So if you want to start adding percentage caps to it, so you encourage new development, I think that's positive. Especially if you start seeing more turnovers of office space or conversions. But I think we've seen, we were really worried about short-term rentals when we did this, but you've seen a lot of people who've developed properties here and just doing long-term, they just want to lease their apartments. Lofts was one down over on the one that's proposed on Hall Street. None of these are short-term rentals. Some of them are, but none of them are. Not all of them are going to be that way. Some of them are just rental properties, so I don't know.
Did you get enough out of all of us for?
Yeah. Do you want me to quickly run through what my notes say? Let me know if I'm
Sure.
missing it. So the first one was just how many hospitality units do we have?
I'm pretty sure the answer is like 8. Pretty sure it's just
Oh, yeah.
those.
Yes.
Second one was basically what other police power tools do we have at our disposal? It may not all be enforcement based. There might be some other tools that help to crack the code on this, but are not part of zoning. Another one was looking for data regarding how many violations we currently have and where we get the information from. Then from Brian, you were wondering if there have been any complaints about tourist homes. And
The intensity.
Yeah, and other people who want to create,
And are there owners who want to change
Yeah.
the 2 levels? I think this is interesting, the total dwelling units in the city, and possibly if we could figure out which are seasonal, which are year-round, and I think we should also look at multiple family versus single family, and where does that 500 fit into those numbers? And then, and how many hotel motel rooms as well. Personally, I'm a big fan of overlay districts, so I'm all about what Mitch was talking about. I think it might be worth, as we take a closer look at some of the maps, if some patterns present themselves that really suggest that an overlay district might make sense. We may come back with some recommendations like that. And then it's not so much, about what the underlying zoning is, as much as this is an area where it makes sense to have them regardless of the underlying zoning. And it might have a positive or negative impact on the overall number, but it might help to make them make more sense and have a smaller impact. So it might lend itself to an overlay district, but we may find there's no distinct pattern that really suggests that. Then from Jackie, new construction, what has the share of short-term rentals been in those? From Brian, what is the trigger for non-conforming use going back to or losing your short-term rental ability? And I
that's
also
not
wrote,
important. I don't care.
okay.
I just
Well,
know it's
now
out
I
there.
care. Now
What the
I'm
exact
interested.
number is doesn't matter to me.
Well, you opened that door.
Yeah,
And how
I was
many-
just saying, I know eventually you'll see some changes. They're not going to increase.
And how many short-term rentals are seasonal or like sporadic? That might be a hard number to get, but that's interesting if we can make some assumptions just to throw it into the mix. I think that's all we had. I'm also kind of interested in what our options might be to offer incentives either to get rid of your license if people are just hanging on to them. Are there,
Yeah,
is
I
there
don't know if it's
some
up.
way we can incentivize either through zoning or in other ways? And it'd be interesting if the city attorney could weigh in on that.
Yeah, and I don't even know if it's allowed or what. So I'd love her feedback on that for sure. Yeah.
Would-
Even if there's other trends
Yeah,
like
would you be
Brian
looking at
mentioned.
like a city buyback of licenses or some cap and trade or just see what's available?
Yes.
All of the above.
Okay. I feel like we went, oh, go ahead, Brian.
It's, you've got this map here that shows all the short-term rentals. It'd be interesting if, I don't know, to know, so these dots, I got a dot here, but for all I know, it's 15 or 20 short-term rentals or one. Kind of a,
Yeah, so we used to when we first started doing it, we used to hand place them. We didn't stack them because there was time to do that. As it started to ramp up, and then we got a new software system, it became easier to maintain by just stacking them. So if you go on the map and click on one, you'll see
talking about
that
this map?
they're, yeah. So if you click on, depending on where you're
So
at, I
like
mean,
go over to Trailside.
yeah.
Oh, right.
So if you click on Trailside, there's 51 on that. So at the top there, yeah.
So it'll show as a single pin.
Yeah, and that was something I mean, ideally we would, it was a
Not.
lot better representation when it wasn't like that, but
Can we graduate the symbols to make them bigger for?
Jerry's like, no.
So. I
yeah, there's
can't-
better
again, I
ways. We
can't-
can, for this discussion, we can definitely do some more visuals on this. I mean, this was mostly just a tool to show so you could find the information if someone was licensed or not, but yeah.
Do we have any data on how much, I wouldn't say a license is getting used, but if it's days or weeks?
You know, I think the monitoring software does give you information like
Okay.
that.
Yeah, I'm not saying that that would be perfect, but if it can at least give us some idea of, oh, we've got a lot of licenses around here, but they're just being sat on because we're not seeing bookings or.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but the thing about it, I guess one of my questions is, what are we trying to do here? My think is that we're trying to encourage more regular housing, more long-term housing. So which for us is, we're really talking about year-round leases, or as close to those as we can possibly get. So whether or not a license is being used or not, or where they're located, I mean, unless you want to, like you said, unless we're talking about an overlay district, I think that's important. If we're seeing them concentrate, I think it's very interesting information, but I don't know if it gets us any closer to our goal of, really what it comes down to is, if our goal is to increase more housing, the main question is, by putting some type of cap on those districts where it's already allowed, will we increase more long-term housing or dwelling units? I'm starting to like that term, dwelling unit.
For
Shorter, you know, I mean, that's our goal, right? To create more dwelling units. So let's, what does that? And I don't know if unless we're talking about adding them to places, or if we're looking at areas and saying there's too many of them, I don't know. I mean, if you're gonna, so I'm just kind of like, let's stay focused on the prize here. And again, I know people want to see the enforcement numbers, and that's fine. I'm just saying that for us, it's not our bailiwick. As long as we don't create more work than, or create some rules that are impossible, I guess I'd like to hear how the 25% rule is working. I guess that's, my question. That's probably the question we need to ask when it comes to enforcement. Is that how difficult or unwieldy is that?
one caveat that I would add to the obvious goal that we've agreed to. The caveat is that, again, I'll go back to the fact that we heard about this so much from the public. I feel like because we're investigating it, we owe it to ourselves and the residents and the community to at least gather this data and investigate it and research it, because we haven't done that comprehensively yet. And so this is the moment where I think we should be able to do that relatively simply and successfully, since it hasn't been done yet. So I think I agree with you that we should stay with a one-track goal, and that we should take it up as an opportunity to do it while we can, before it's too late.
You're right. More information is definitely, the more information you have, the better you are able to reach your goals. So I'm just, I just don't want to get, the information's fine.
Yeah.
But, how much, the information's fine, but again, I'm not gathering it.
Correct. Go ahead, Jackie.
One more thing for Leslie's list. As you're talking about incentivizing, and we're talking about, well, is the market shifting enough that there's going to be a natural transition from short-term rental to year-round dwellings? Whether there are any communities that have figured that piece out and been successful in incentivizing that to kind of push the market in that direction. I'm not being clear, am I?
No, it makes a lot of sense. It made sense to me. I think I would want it within like Michigan, because it could get really hairy if you look elsewhere.
So are you
Although if we were-
saying, has anyone, because I think part of the issue with Traverse City is that now, we've opened the floodgates, and now we're saying, have we opened them too much? Is there a way we can get some of those back? I don't know how many are in that position, because many of them that I've talked to that have instituted caps, and they're not necessarily building-specific caps like we have here, but they're jurisdiction-wide or zoning district-wide, then they have found that they don't get anywhere near their caps. So I would be very surprised if there are very many that have found themselves in this position. And just as a little aside, I'll tell you that prior to working here, I was at Long Lake Township and set up their short-term rental program there. And we specifically did this only as a police power ordinance. It does not involve zoning districts at all. So that when they did make some changes, specifically, they restricted them only to single-family dwellings, opposite of Traverse City. Did not want them in multiple family buildings because those tended to be rentals and people were getting kicked out of their rental units. They were able to do that. People lost their ability to short-term rent. They had no grandfathered or non-conforming rights under zoning. And so it could be shifted without that complication. But then, it had to be jurisdiction-wide that you could do it wherever without any zones. So, there are as many versions as we can think of, I would think. So I'll see if, I'll feel around, but I would be surprised if there were any other jurisdictions that have this similar kind of thing, or if they've found a way to de-incentivize, they found that sweet spot of how many and how to, contain it within there. I think most are kind of guessing and trying to come up with what makes sense as a cap.
Thank you. And in terms of, do we want to look within the state of Michigan, there could be value in looking for other municipalities that have a significant share of tourism in their economy. If we're looking for benchmarks, or
Yeah.
I wouldn't hesitate to look at Park City, Utah, or
And, I think
Yeah.
some good comparison towns are like Empire and Charlevoix nearby, because those, I do think that they have gotten to that area where they are trying to figure out what that magic cap is, and they are getting inundated, and primarily in their downtown residential areas, those are becoming now short-term rentals. So I guess I'm going to renege on what I just said. I think there are some. I don't know if they've figured it out yet, but I think there are some that have experienced that, the point where they think they're at saturation or that they really need a cap.
thank you.
Yeah, and I think in terms of what I said, Jackie, I immediately thought otherwise, because I think I've heard a couple stories and I interacted with some people in Telluride that experienced this kind of thing. And so I think it's right, just within the caveat of like, well, that state probably has different laws compared to Michigan. So
Makes
I think, yes, it would be good to hear some, and I think we'd have to weigh them differently than the Michigan ones. But yes, makes sense.
So basically, we'll look for some case studies that might help to inform some of your decisions.
The city, from going by my memory, which goes back maybe 25 years here, has never allowed, because I remember way back when, has never allowed short-term rentals in the residential zone. Nothing under 30 days in our residential districts. But, and I think I recall back in, when the downtown was a desert or a wasteland, that the zoning was changed to encourage any type of housing in the downtown commercial districts. And it was just across all the commercial districts. And that's what allowed the short-term rentals. There wasn't a lot back then. It wasn't an issue, didn't exist. But it was always only in our commercial districts. And so what we did when we started seeing these things springing up and these developments and these existing condos suddenly go because they didn't ban it, or suddenly, and you hear from people, I know residents who moved out because they went from a residential condo unit to suddenly everyone's got it, and when they want to change the bylaws, it's too late because 60% of the people are renting them out. They don't want to change it. And so those go almost completely short-term rentals. So that's when we kind of dialed it back in those districts, at least in the C1 and the C2. And again, but yeah, I don't know, it's interesting because you bring that up. I forgot how we kind of got to where we're at. But like you said, like Charlevoix, they allowed it anywhere in all their zoning districts. They encouraged it. I attended a meeting where the mayor at the time, or commissioner in the city of Charlevoix, was saying, we don't regulate it at all, we love it, people want to do it, it's their property, we're good with it, let's go. And then they discovered they suddenly didn't have any residents anymore. Suddenly other funding started, all your road funding, everything starts dropping because you don't have your own population anymore. It becomes your schools get hurt and everything else. So, yeah, they went one way and then they tried to claw it back and go the other. So it'd be interesting how they're working out. But, yeah, so I have a house up in Charlevoix. So it's a long-term rental.
Well, I think that was a really thorough conversation on this topic. I think it was more than you asked for, Leslie, so I hope it's sufficient. Okay,
I'll hand this all over to Sean.
great. I would like to open up public comment on this issue specifically the agenda item of short-term rental regulations is how it's referenced. So what do I say every time? You have if you are interested in public comment, please go to the podium, state your name.
Your address,
go.
if you reside in the city, your address. Keep your comments respectful, and you have 3 minutes. So if you want to talk, you can go up there.
Thank you, Katie. Sorry, I'm vice chair and don't often have to do this.
I've never had to say it.
Seeing no, oh.
Hi, Kara Gelvin, 439 Webster Street. I kind of am torn, actually, about suggestions. To start with, I'm a broker that owns a real estate company in town. I also own a property management company. I also own short-term rentals. So this is what I do for a living. And I specialize in people buying short-term rentals. So the market is self-leveling. It's already happening. It's a year ago, crazy difference between the demand of people wanting to buy units, and now you're already seeing units listed on Trailside popping up quite frequently. You're also seeing the prices of the units also regulating themselves, coming down. The interest rates and just demand, and we also haven't even talked about how many hotel rooms are coming online in the next year or two, and that itself is just supply versus demand is a big thing. My biggest concern is resale, to be honest, and not everyone who owns these units are big investors who that's all they do. I have quite a few clients' friends who live in town, wanted to do something to diversify their retirement and bought a short-term rental. But it will be crushing to them to lose out on $100K on resale if they cannot resell that as a short-term rental. And they went about it in the right way. They're following the rules, they're doing it the correct way. And found someone who's showing them the permits to follow and where not to do it. So I am concerned about that aspect. I think in my head and following all the other townships that have done stuff, to me it makes the most sense to cap it at or around, just combine. You don't have to really go by zone. Like you can just take all the different zoning areas and have a number, if that's the 510, 520, what it is right now. And that makes it so that the next 20, let's say you took Trailside and you capped it at 25%, the next 75% of people are going to take a major hit. And you're going to have people that just hold on to these properties. I just don't see that going well. And if you're really trying to get housing to open back up, if it's take a $100K loss or hold it and make $40K a year, I think it's a pretty easy decision, to be honest. So that's one of the things that come to mind as an option if capping is the goal. And I am actually in agreement with capping it. I think us being the only ones that don't have it has led to some issues. So
That was 3 minutes.
okay, perfect.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Okay, Sam Flamont, 1719 Apache Pass. I'm in agreement with Kara. I think a cap is a good thing. I think we have gone a long way. Brian, to answer your question on the 25% rule, if that's a thought, there has been almost zero development as far as just short-term rentals in that area because of the fact the numbers don't work. I think a couple people out here know that. But I agree with Kara on the cap. I also agree that the biggest thing for me, other townships have done, Elmwood's done it, East Bay's done it, they've capped it, and then they've created a waiting list, and the property can no longer become or stay a short-term rental upon sale. And I think that's a huge detriment, like Kara said, to people who did follow the rules along the way. So if there is a unit that is a short-term rental and it sells, just like right now I think in C1 or C2, when it sells, it can convey, the new owner has 60 or 90 days, I believe, to get a new rental. I believe that rule needs to stay in because people who follow the rules and did what they were allowed to do should not have to lose a ton of money on an investment property. But I am in favor of a cap, whether it be 500, 510, whatever it is. And I also don't believe we have to go into the weeds with each zone. Just a citywide cap actually makes easy sense to me. Easy thing to follow. I know this surprises some people, like I know, maybe Jackie, you're surprised with me a little bit here. But self-leveling, like Kara said, Capri was selling for $450 in 21. They're now down to $289 in some of these units because the demand is far less. The rental rates are far lower. I mean, I'm just like Kara. I own a brokerage. I own a property management company, and we see our clients going, "What's happened? We're down 30%. We're down 40%." And that's where it is. I also stood up here 4 years ago and said, if you let us keep building, we're going to build you a bunch of housing units for the future, and that's what's happening. A lot of these units that were short-term rentals are slowly becoming long-term rentals because the short-term rentals that make 20 grand, well, you can rent that out now for 2 grand a month and make 24 grand. So I'm a big favor of cap. I really am. And I believe that we've built a ton of units. Capri 1, Eastside 1, Gillis, Randolph, Cypress, Cypress 2, they're all going to become long-term housing eventually. And I think we'll look back on this by capping this, and you'll say, for that brief period of time when we had a ton of short-term rentals, we were really appreciative that we let those people build, because now we have housing-ready units for these new people that are coming to town, especially when the airport expands. People are going to come here and keep coming. So in favor of the cap, don't think we need to go into the weeds as far as which districts and how much per district. That's just my opinion.
Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing no movement, I'll close public comment.
Just want to
Yeah.
clarify a couple things.
Yeah.
In case I confuse people with my rambling. If we do it by zoning, so it's allowed by zoning, and hence, as long as you don't abandon the use, doesn't matter who owns the property. It's a grandfather use, so if the property is, if you have a short-term rental license now, and even if you're not using it as a short-term license, and you maintain that license and you're renting it out by the year, you could pretty much claim it's still a short-term use. I don't know. I mean, it'd be difficult to argue it otherwise. But you have to abandon the use before you lose the ability to continue the use. So a sale does not eliminate the ability to maintain that license, because the townships do police power, which means you have it and they can take it away anytime they want, and there's no recourse. Under zoning, because the way the city did it, good, bad, or indifferent, it's pretty much the use remains as long as the use doesn't change. I hadn't thought about that, but I like the idea. I guess I'd add one more thing. Let's just look at a one-number cap. Keep it simple, and just go there. So I think it's something we should add to our list. But I don't think we can do it. That's the city commission would have to do that. So maybe we should ask the city commission if they like that idea first. If they like it, then we can go on to priority 2.
We can run that up the flagpole and get back to you.
Well, I came back to silence, so I think we're moving on to the next agenda item, which is master plan implementation, Planning Commission Master Plan Prioritization Summary. I believe this is for you, Leslie, and I think this is summarizing the conversations that we had pretty in-depth last meeting, or maybe last study session. So I think you can take it away.
Yeah, I think this is a shorter conversation than the short-term rental discussion. But what I did was take the information I got at our last meeting when we talked about prioritizing, and shifted around all of the 13-some tasks, and also combined some of them that seemed to go together, and came up with, I guess, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 levels of activities that we would do for the implementation. So I really just wanted to make sure that I got this right, and I also did my best to assign kind of a time and money value, relative value on these, and also did try to address the questions that came up last time. So just looking for some input, and if you're ready to go on that second tier of issues.
I think we can go with kind of the same flow that we had on the first agenda item. The ones, so I guess I should clarify. If they had a single H character thing, those implied the simplest, correct? Okay,
Fewer staff hours, yes.
great. And then the ones that included the dollar sign, the symbol, there was also an added expense with that. So
Right.
anything that had more of those were on the larger lift side of things and larger expense side of
Yes,
things.
those are
Okay.
the ones that seem to be the ones that would necessitate maybe hiring out some
Consultants,
additional consultation and how involved that would get. So this is pretty squishy, but I think it gives you an idea.
Great. That's how I read it. I mean, the ones with the single H's are kind of no-brainers to me. I feel like this is what I said last time, but it's low-hanging fruit, so I feel like we can go for it. That's my opinion, at least on the summarization, and I do feel like you did a very good job summarizing like all of the information we did throw at you last time, and the groupings and the priority of the groupings that we did. So it made a lot of sense in a concise document. Group, anything else from? I mean, nobody's talked yet, so of course there's going to be things.
Works for me.
Yeah. Oh, great.
It's not my prioritization list, but no, I think it's
Yeah.
fine.
Group priority. Go ahead, Jackie.
I thought that Leslie did a really nice job of capturing our free-range discussion.
Yeah.
And I had a couple of follow-up questions. One has to do with the zoning atlas project, which is referenced here as an answer to better understanding our role in realizing housing goals. And as I recall, the current status of that housing or zoning atlas project, that was something that Housing North was coordinating and was looking for funding from.
Yes, and they
The
just
city.
kicked it off.
Great. Did they get funding from the city? I don't recall that.
Don't quote me, I don't know exactly how they, got all of their funding, but I did just attend a session that was kind of the kickoff. So that is starting, and in talking to Sean about this question, that was his offer as, in answer to that question was the zoning atlas, which I think does make sense because it's not only helping to quantify numbers of need and or demand and availability, but helps to identify areas of least resistance, and it's expected that it's going to be focused quite a bit on certain corridors that lend themselves to absorbing a lot of density without a lot of need for more infrastructure and without outsized impact in other ways on existing uses. So I think that's the direction it's going to go, and he felt that that's going to inform that question.
Then I think I have a concern. I thought that our discussion was at a higher policy sort of level, and what I remember hearing about certainly the Grand Rapids area zoning atlas was that it was intended primarily as a tool for developers. to help them understand where does the infrastructure exist, where is the demand likely to be, and it was more a boots on the ground benefit than a policy setting document. So I guess I'd like to continue that conversation about housing policy and whether
I heard of it as both.
oh
So,
okay.
but maybe I misheard.
well
So maybe that's just a
maybe we just need a clarification.
definition at large that we need, is
Yeah.
like what that looks like, yeah.
I think it's both, because I think it's, in the first instance, it's information, and then it has the potential to be expanded and to become a wider tool, and help to set policy. So, and I don't know if that requires additional funding off the top of my head, but it is kind of a process.
Well, as long as we're all confident that we're keeping that portion relating to policy, and whatever our abilities are to impact that, that's really where my highest interest, and I think a good use of our time would be. The other question that I had was pulling together resources to be shared, and I'd like to be able to continue to offer contributions, that we don't put this solely on staff to be rustling up information, but that all of us can be alert and contributing to the process.
Yes, we have some resources put together, and last I heard, we were trying to figure out how we can get it either on our website or have it in a way that's easily accessible to all of you.
Shared drive of some kind, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, it's just kind of like, if it's a shared drive, then it's not necessarily a public thing, but
Good point.
if it's on the website, is it, is that the best place for like a repository just of like links to articles and things like that? So we're just kind of wrestling with what that actually looks like and who can access it and how it should be accessed. So,
Yep.
yeah.
The one thing that I'll say about the adhering to policy, like prioritizing policies that you were just talking about, Jackie, is it will be, yes, that should be important, and it will likely be challenging with multiple municipalities having to either agree to policies or recreate policies. So, yeah, I think, yes, we definitely prioritize, and it could, who knows what that'll look like. So as long as we have that frame, I think we'll still be thinking about it for sure throughout the Atlas process.
Call me an optimist, but I'm looking at the Metropolitan Planning Organization with zeroing in on that and wondering if that might end up being a vehicle for participation. But
Looks good. Great. Okay. Seeing no other real movement. Go ahead.
Yeah, just, I know that there's prioritization in here, but I see the first priority things as ongoing discussions that will continue to be ongoing. Is there any timeline as some of the, I'm seeing priority 2 and 3 items can be tackled more or less piecemeal as, hey, here's a discrete thing that we can get some draft language together and move along.
Yeah, I think the idea is that, if the Planning Commission thinks that this is the priorities, and, if you don't mind beginning a new conversation before, for instance, short-term rental discussion is done, at the very least, in the background, we can start doing some research and getting information together on priority 2. And a lot of it's going to depend on what walks in the door and takes our attention away for any development projects or proposals for rezoning or anything like that.
Yeah, I think I was interpreting it as kind of like a plug and play. Sometimes some things will come in because we have the space in the meetings and we can afford to make the space for that. Sometimes it'll have to wait because we get a random request or a slup or something. But yeah, that's a good point. Great. Moving on, I'm going to open public comment on this portion of the agenda. Seeing nothing, I'm going to close public comment on this portion of the agenda. So we're on our final agenda item, which is the State Planning Conference recap. I think some of us, not me, I'm so sorry, went to the Michigan Planning Conference last week.
You can't
Association
speak
of
for Debbie
Planning.
Hershey?
Oh, no, I cannot. I mean, she did attend, you're right. And I didn't get a summary from her. I should have asked for that before this meeting. So any thoughtful things? I know that Leslie and I talked about one of the many conferences that she has been attending, and I thought that was an interesting conversation that we should talk about. I also realized we probably should have talked about it during the master plan agenda item, but if you could bring that up at some point during this last agenda item with the group, that would be great.
What was that about?
The work, live, play thing that you just learned
yeah,
about?
Yeah. Actually, I think I could put it in our resources.
Okay.
Because I thought it was pretty fascinating. It might help to figure out what some of the ratios are of, housing to non-housing to, and the way that this particular session laid it out is live, work, play, live being permanent residences, play being, or work being office only, not other places of employment, but office only. And this is only in urban core areas, walkable urban core areas, and then everything else being play. So whether it's retail or opera house or
Dining,
restaurants, it would have to be something where money is changing hands. So they weren't including things like parkland, but they were comparing the overall square footage of each of those uses and the ratio of them, and looking at different jurisdictions and bringing into the the discussion GDP and how healthy those communities were, and they've arrived at sort of their optimal ratio. And it would be fascinating, I think, may not be that easy to come up with those numbers I'm looking at, Jerry, but if we could do that, just to see if we are off, or if we need to look at our office square footage as something that will have a future life, and that we can't necessarily depend on it remaining office, at least in that magical ratio, but also, keeping in mind, how do we make all of these spaces as flexible as possible so that we can react to the market a little bit more deftly. So it was just an interesting webinar that just happened to be today, but since I have the floor, I'll just tell you that I also went to a sustainability conference last week. And if anyone has looked through the sessions available at the Michigan Association of Planning Conference, we do have access to any of the materials from all of those sessions. So if one of them piqued your interest and you wanted some more information, I don't think MAP has any issue with us sharing those with non-attendees because they have made that public. So be happy to get that to you as well. There were some really good ones. My favorite ones were one about immigration, very eye-opening, and another one, Mitch was at it as well, was food recycling, And, we are doing some of that in the city, but this was focused on the city of Sterling Heights, and their goal is to have 100%, no food waste going into their trash, all of it going through recycling. So it was interesting, I thought.
I'd be interested in both of those things that you said.
And I probably didn't use all the right words in that, but you get the gist.
Anyone else learn anything interesting,
Well,
remarkable?
Yeah, going off of that last session that Leslie mentioned about reducing food waste and better managing waste stream overall, we don't have the benefit of a community like Sterling Heights or Ann Arbor being surrounded by more urban fabric of potential partner municipalities, since we have townships all around us that I wouldn't expect if we can't get them to come to the plate on a joint sidewalk project that they're going to play ball on composting. But I do see definite opportunities, especially maybe not citywide, but that we can concentrate in our downtown and other commercial districts to reduce that food waste stream and increase overall sustainability. We can't ban single-use plastics, but one option that has been done is if you're going to have composting, and we're going to, say, expand the pilot project that currently exists on Woodmere for more commercial scale composting, to then have single vendors for your compostable eatware. Because as it is right now, you might have a dozen different places downtown that are each getting a different combination of spoon or straw or cup or lid, and some may work with our existing composting system, others may not. But it wouldn't be, you have to use the single vendor, but if you go through a bulk vendor contract across a downtown or some commercial zone, then it can streamline the process and help make it easier for other communities, for other businesses to get on board.
Just got to throw this tidbit. So I was in Italy this summer and went to McDonald's. McDonald's food in Italy is way better than U.S.
In
But
France
Complete
also.
cultural victory.
No plastic, including utensils, were made out of wood. Everything was either paper or wood.
Which McDonald's?
One in Rome was right down the street from where we were staying.
Oh.
No, noted.
The one where Mussolini was hung?
I have no idea where that was.
Well, that spot has been converted into McDonald's in Rome.
Could have been, who knows?
Well, I like the idea. I think it makes a lot of sense. And I don't know, I have hope that some little townships would be like, yeah, I'm interested in that, because we wouldn't have that opportunity if we didn't have a larger city. So I think it's possible. It's not unheard of.
Hey, Emmett County has a great county-wide composting program.
Anything else interesting from the conference?
I went on a walking tour that was very good,
Okay.
and we were looking at kind of the designs of different apartment buildings, and they were just kind of pointing out a lot of different things that I've never really thought about, as we will just hopefully go into.
Yeah.
But like even like the incline of stairs and like how steep they are, and like some of these were like new builds, and like looking at it first I was like, oh, that's cool, and then they're like, well, actually that's kind of too steep, and or where like if you couldn't see the front door, what do they call it, the trick or treat test?
Yeah.
So, and I hadn't heard of that. So kids should be able to see the front door of a
Okay.
building.
And like and know what the front door is, so when they don't have to think about it.
Oh, so it doesn't look like just
Yeah,
a
that it's,
wall
like,
that they can.
obvious and that it's inviting and all that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But it was, yeah, the one like brownstone, although I think they were gray, but kind of newer, and so they had stairs in the front, because we were on this walking tour together. They had stairs in the front, so it looked like, kind of like New York, like the brownstones and stuff. But yeah, the stairways were way bigger. They didn't have a stoop at the top. And so it was just like, they like almost did it, but like just kind of missed the mark. So like people aren't hanging out on their stoops the way you can in the more urban areas. And yeah, it really was like 12 steps up or something. So then you think about kids trick-or-treating, like that's kind of a long way up. There's no stoop for them to like make that circulation. Again, that's not the only important thing, but that's just like an easy one to think about, like, traffic on going up to.
So it looked cute, and then when they like pointed it out, it's like, oh yeah, like
But it was overall, that tour was really great. We had like some very interesting people in that tour, so it was kind of fun talking to the different participants. But yeah, we were mostly looking at like multifamily units that were just like in almost the whole time we were just in like residential neighborhoods. So they just like really fit in, usually on corners, and different styles. And I mean, these people who just happened to be on the tour were remembering, what years they got built and why they kind of looked the way that they did. So it was interesting. There was that very interesting Meijer grocery store.
yes, with units on top.
Oh, I've seen this Meijer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't say Meijer.
No,
It's
Well,
not
neither does
obvious.
the
No.
one in downtown Lansing.
it's not obvious at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fancy.
And it
Yeah.
looks, it was a
high-end
nice
Meijer.
looking building. The thing that was interesting to Jessica and I was one guy who, again, just happened to be on the tour. I don't think he was really part of.
Like the most interesting person on the tour.
But he kept talking about the glass on buildings and how that makes such a difference, the visibility of the glass. And so a more visible, kind of looks more inviting, and you can see. And so it was great.
We do have something in our zoning code about that,
We
about
do,
glass.
yes.
So I
I
think
talked to Dave
we
about
could,
it, yeah.
we
Our
should.
commercial zones.
Yes, yeah. I remember talking about it at one point for a new. I think it's Forefront, before Forefront was going up. I think because it was so much glass, we had talked about it. But that is something we could definitely talk about again.
They also are privatizing their parking decks, so they are not building anymore. It was just interesting.
They're getting rid of all their surface parking, and then the downtown isn't gonna be, like, Grand Rapids will not be building any more parking decks, and so any new ones are private.
How
which
many
we
did
just-
they
Then Jessica and
have?
I just had an experience at a private parking deck in Grand Rapids yesterday, and it was a lot of money. And the spaces were very small, but,
Well, the market decides.
I know,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I did ask him, if there was any, with these private parking decks, if there was any, if the city makes any, like, demands or regulations or something, and he said, no, it was wide open. So, some I think are more desirable than others.
Interesting.
What are they doing with their existing parking
Yeah.
lots?
Like
The
one
city
that
ones, the
was
city
made
owned ones?
into like a night market, he was saying, so they were kind of
Parking lot,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah, like
They're
the surface
keeping their, they're just not building any, the city of Grand Rapids is not building more parking decks, but
But
so
they're
they're
keeping
selling.
their existing ones.
Yes, and then selling all, surface
Surface
lots
lots.
off to development.
Mm.
But yeah, in the interim, one, like this massive parking lot, surface lot, abutting a residential neighborhood. And, this was a weekday when we were walking, and it was, completely empty. And so he said, yeah, the end corner, they've already been kind of converting to a night market. They changed
Kind
some
of a
over to like,
community
it was
area.
like soccer. Yeah, so just more usable for the community, converting it to like a park or something, until then I guess a building is there and then there's no more park, but yeah. It was cool. That was very fun to see that stuff and how they fit into the these were like it was a traditional neighborhood of kind of Victorian homes, single family homes, or, clearly like duplexes and stuff, but it was nice to see all that.
I like all of that. I think as you Yeah, I think planning and everything that we do about planning is like, what is the thing right now? What is it? What can the space accommodate now? What can the space accommodate in 5 years, 10 years? And what does that look like? Because I think, I'm just guessing, but I think, because it's pretty similar to Traverse City, 30, 40 years ago, when there were more active and operating offices downtown, we probably needed a lot of those surface lots. Do we need a lot of those surface lots today? Who knows? So
Ask
I think
AT&T
it's
how much
ever
utility
evolving.
they get from their surface lot.
Yeah, right.
Depends who you talk to
Correct. Yeah.
and your perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You live close to you live close to downtown and there's cars parked in front of your street and in and
Yeah.
out all day long.
Yeah.
Yeah, you want those parking spots.
Mm-hmm.
You don't really care. Unless you're driving down looking for a parking spot.
What about like that stacked parking, like in New York? Can we have those here?
Which one are you talking
You
about?
know, when you like, they're like those.
Like an
Elevator
elevator
style.
Yeah.
lift.
Well,
Oh.
if your
Elevator
Oh, yeah.
if your parking is $200-300 a day, then there's
Yeah.
more
There's
opportunity.
incentives for it,
Yeah.
The thing about it, the thing about you always have to remember is scale, because scale's important.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, in Grand Rapids, you can be much bigger downtown.
Yeah.
Though it is, you are bordered by residential streets, but a lot of those don't allow any parking. So, where here, our downtown is relatively small. And so people still complain about having to walk 3 blocks, but it's mostly employees who complain about parking.
Yeah, that's true.
It's because it's just the cost of doing business. And if you're in the service industry, which a lot of our downtown is, it's a serious cost.
Even though the DDA and Beta have offered transit passes, but that has seen relatively little uptake.
Yeah, it's all, but then it comes, transit's great and I use it, but it's also a question of time.
Mm-hmm.
How much time do you have?
Yeah.
And, when you have our lives are busy. If you're working in this town, your life is busy. And you wait, just take the bus and it takes you 30 minutes to get downtown and 15 minutes to walk the bus and 15 minutes to walk the back. Some people make that work in their lives. Not everyone does. It's a lifestyle choice.
And it depends on how much they're valuing their own time.
Yeah,
If-
pretty much. Now you want to use it and spend it. And it's just also, the car's ingrained in me. Never was an issue. I mean, I grew up in the city. I took the bus. I didn't have a car. When I got a car, I drove. Up here, I drive for my business. So,
Well, on that note, public comment on this last topic. It was kind of all over because it was just conference summaries. But I will also open just general public comment.
Doug Kimball, Spruce Street, Traverse City. The more I'm thinking about the short-term rental conversation, the more I'm getting confused. So if the cap would be overall, so that's the entire city, so now the cap residential would be included in the cap?
No.
No, okay, thank you for that one.
Yeah.
And then the overlay district, the same question. So no plans for short-term rentals in residentials?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Overlays are kind of complicated because they just sit on top of the districts. But I think, maybe I don't know the answer, but I think you can exclude portions of it. It doesn't have to be the whole city.
Yeah, and, an overlay district sometimes is a physical district that has contiguous boundary, and sometimes it's it's a description, like everything within this district that has this frontage on this road, or something like that. So it can be a combination of things, but it's a way, without creating a whole new zoning district, to limit a certain use to an area that may not exactly coincide with the zoning district.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry for the confusion. Any other public comment? Seeing none, I'll close public comment, and I think we're adjourned unless anyone else up here has anything to say. Great. Thanks, y'all. Thank you. So sorry, it was not as short as you thought. But I still